Byron's reputation as a poet is arguably rivaled and perhaps even bested by his reputation as a lover. Good-looking, rich, aristocratic, and of course he had that way with words. And his poetry reflected that persona. He dealt with a lot of his personality traits in his poetry, and of course that is part of the romantic plan. It is a very self-reflective and individualized genre of poetry, so he was working within that. But some of the more clever uses of it that he comes up with show his particular character of being a bit of a cad, perhaps, very much the love 'em and leave 'em type, excuse me. And one of the more interesting poems, just a short little lyric that captures this in a kind of a cheeky way, is his lyric, "So we'll go no more a-roving." Now, this poem was originally included in a letter to a friend, the poet, the Irish poet Thomas Moore. He wrote it when he was like 29 years old. Interesting date, 29. You know, getting up there and knocking on 30, and of course he would only live another 5 years. But he wrote it in this letter just among friends, and Moore published it half a dozen years after Byron's death, in a book of collection of those letters that he had exchanged with Byron. And it is a very interesting little poem. It's curious, it's fun, and it has a really interesting, I would say, and not completely original, but an interesting turn, combining form and content. The work of the poet in that respect, and it is very enjoyable for its simplicity, and it's relatively short, so it tends to get anthologized a lot. So we'll go no more a-roving, of 1817. So we'll go no more a-roving so late into the night, though the heart be still as loving and the moon be still as bright. For the sword outwears its sheath, and the soul wears out the breast, and the heart must pause to breathe, and love itself have rest. Though the night was made for loving, and the day returns too soon, yet we'll go no more a-roving by the light of the moon. Lilting, lovely, a kind of elegy to wild youth, and it's not hard to imagine. Well, he's 29. He's maybe thinking about settling down, maybe getting a little tired. As somebody who remembers 29, you slow down a little bit. And his problem is he really didn't slow down enough. But you can see that in there, and he is in this. And knowing the background of the story or of the poem, only the story of the poem helps that. You can imagine two young rakes who are just swapping comments and chatting informally in letter form, and including a little verse in there playfully, and just saying, we're getting a little old for this. Maybe it's time to stop and settle down and be conventional and all of that stuff. And you get a sense of a kind of wistfulness in this, and it's so playful and musical. So we'll go no more a-roving so late into the night, though the heart be still as loving and the moon be still as bright. That focus on the heart, that focus on the moon, very romantic tropes right there. For the sword outweighs its sheath, kind of a sexual image there. And the soul wears out the breast. The heart must pause to breathe, and love itself have rest. Again, the focus on the heart, the focus on love, but the idea that it is the heart and the act of loving itself is a kind of individualized organism, and it has a life of its own. I think that's characteristic of Byron generally, who would let his heart take him wherever it would, and he could objectify that heart and his desires a little bit more than perhaps another person who might feel a little bit more culpable for their actions. But where it's really interesting, I think, after setting up this kind of lazy, lilting, oh, wouldn't it be great to be young again? We have had so much fun. And musically, the poem is bringing you along on that in a very simple diction and rhyme scheme and pleasant little idling musicality. But then in that last stanza, though the light was made for loving and the day returns too soon, one thinks of Shakespeare's lines about the lark and the nightingale in Romeo and Juliet, very common tropes of poetry. Yet we'll go no more a roving. Again, very musical, very poetic, very self-consciously arty, by the light of the moon. Notice the tonal shift there. There is no way to say that line in the same lilting fashion. He breaks the rhythm. He breaks the structure. He keeps the rhyme, but the rhythm itself is fractured. The line cuts short. There should be an extra beat in there, and there is not. And that sense of incompletion, that sense of dissonance, lands like a wrong note. And that's kind of the point, because in that line he is concluding that, well, all right, it's time to stop living poetically, it's time to stop living romantically, maybe it is time to go settle down, get a real job, get married, have kids, and, pay a mortgage and all that stuff. He never did any of that stuff. Well, he got married a couple of times, I think, but his life was kind of a mess. But in that form marries content mode, he is demonstrating a mastery of the poetic medium, and it is not especially unique in the way he is doing it, but it is very well executed. And the one of the reasons for its popularity, I would say, it is very frequently anthologized, is that it is very musical and it sounds great. And if you are in a classroom and the teacher can recite this, or even a fellow student can recite this and kind of get swept up in the lilting joy of it and the romance and the prettiness, and then you can hit that last line and just, it sounds dead. And that sense of dead is a peek into Byron's psychology and the psychology of romantic poets generally, who would get swept up in love and swept up in enthusiasm and swept up in their passions, but the hard truths, the prosaic truths of ordinary life always reassert themselves in the end.